Hi Founder fans, Jason here, and today's founder is William Washington. And if the name Washington sounds familiar, it's because yes, William was related to the George Washington. They were second cousins, and although distant, they both were from Virginia and knew each other fairly well throughout their lives. So when the Revolutionary War breaks out and young William here comes seeking a commission, well, it certainly helps that his cousin was commander-in-chief. But William would do his part, as we will see. So William Washington becomes a captain in the Continental Army. And right off the bat, he selects a lieutenant that's just a 17-year-old boy. And this 17-year-old boy ends up being James Monroe, who 42 years later, unbeknownst to either of them at the time, would be the 5th president of the United States of America. Now, they served together throughout the New York-New Jersey campaign, and actually during the Battle of Trenton, which was an astounding success for the Patriots, both William and James Monroe were pretty significantly injured. However, once they healed, they did part and go their separate ways, with William Washington going to become a colonel of light dragoons, which are similar to a cavalry, except dragoons, while cavalry usually stays on their horse, dragoons usually dismount when they get to the battle. Either way, William Washington goes down to the Southern Department, and he does a great job, and he becomes a favorite of Daniel Morgan, who sends him on many skirmishes, among which there's a skirmish called Rugeley's Mill. And at Rugeley's Mill, William Washington does something very interesting. First, he surrounds a barn full of redcoats, and the redcoats are in this barn, and William Washington pulls out his Quaker gun. Now, this is the first known use, at least in America, of a Quaker gun. This seems to be where Quaker guns get their name, though they would become much more popular because of the lore William Washington gave it in the Civil War. But I'm sure you're asking yourself, what is a Quaker gun? Well, it's not a gun. It's a log painted black to look like a cannon from a distance. And what William Washington did is he used this Quaker gun and showed it to the enemy he had surrounded in a barn and said, "You better come out and surrender or I'm going to start firing." And the British, who saw this gun from afar, said okay and surrendered, and it worked. Now I do want to note here, I'm not sure if calling it a Quaker gun is an offensive term or not. Quakers famously are pacifists and would not go to war, so it seems to be that calling it a Quaker gun means it's the only type of gun a Quaker would use because it's not really a gun. I sure hope that's not offensive. If it does offend someone, I do apologize. That just seems to be the name that is used for this type of weapon. Either way, William Washington continues fighting for the American revolutionaries. He fights on several occasions throughout the South in most of the important battles of the South, including the Battle of Cowpens, where he has an engagement with none other than Banastre Tarleton, who at the time and historically has become known as one of the most violent British officers, although some of the accounts of what he did seem to have been overblown. Even the American patriots did use propaganda from time to time. But either way, Banastre Tarleton starts to, they both dismount and they get an engagement and they're fighting hand to hand, Banastre Tarleton and William Washington. And Washington injures Tarleton, but about the same time, a stray bullet hits him in the foot. And Tarleton, whose name I cannot say very well, starts to flee. And Washington chases him for several miles, but because of the injury to his foot, just simply cannot keep up. That's okay, though, because he does heal, and he goes on to participate in the Battle of Eutaw Springs, where at that point, he has a horse shot out from under him, and the horse lands on him, and the British come over and bayonet him for his third serious wound of the war, though William Washington does survive this wound, and he was brought into prison camp. Fortunately for him, the Battle of Yorktown ended hostilities just about a month later, so he was released shortly after his capture. Now, interestingly for Washington, again, he was from Virginia like the rest of the Washington family, but after the war ends, he ends up moving to South Carolina, where he serves in the state assembly on several occasions, and at one point he's actually floated to become governor, or at least run for governor of South Carolina, but he declines. And interestingly, he declines because he believes that the governor of a state should have been born in that state. Obviously, he had no concern with someone being born in a different state holding office, because he was a state assemblyman for quite some time, but from his perspective, to run a state, much like under the Constitution, the United States, to be president, you have to be born in the United States, and he thought the same way for the local and state level. So that's William Washington, probably the most successful Washington other than George when it comes to military action. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you hit like. And if you're new here, subscribe. I put out videos about the American Revolution 5 days a week. And I'll be back with another founder for you tomorrow.